Welcome to this video from the Consultants Development Institute. I'm Carter McNamara, an instructor with the Institute and the presenter in this video. This video is entitled The Action Planning Phase of Consulting. In the previous phase of consulting entitled Discovery and Feedback, you and your client conducted some research in your client's organization. You both discovered various issues that needed attention, and you generated recommendations to address each of them. Also, you both worked to gain agreement in your client's organization on which recommendations to follow. So now, you and your client are ready to convert those recommendations into various goals and associated action plans. In this video, we will clarify the goals of this phase. We'll discuss whether it's timely to do a vision for change now or to do that later. We'll review the criteria for very useful action plans, and we'll look at the typical contents of those plans. We'll also share general guidelines for developing useful action plans, including the objectives in the plans and how to integrate those objectives to ensure that they're realistic. Then we'll be ready to organize the recommendations and the action plans into an overall change management plan. This video focuses on highlights about action plans. However, the texts for CDI's organizational consulting programs give more specific guidelines about developing those plans. Let's look at the goals of this action planning phase. The overall goal of this phase is to convert the selected recommendations from the earlier discovery phase into recommended goals and associated action plans. Then those action plans are closely examined to assure they are all aligned and integrated with each other to avoid any conflict and duplication of plans. Then, those integrated plans are all quickly examined again to be sure they are all relevant and realistic to accomplish. And last, the examined action plans are integrated into an overall relevant and realistic change management plan. You and your client might choose a different name for that plan, but we'll use that name in this video. It's important to remember that the recommended goals are to be achieved during this phase in the most relevant and realistic manner in your client's organization. Some people might prefer at this point to focus their efforts on articulating a broad, compelling vision for change. A vision for change can be a powerful means to sustain the type of motivation and momentum needed for successful change. The activities of developing that vision can be very inspiring and exciting. However, at this point, be careful. Doing a vision now might actually end up hurting your very important action planning, even if it seems like the vision would be a very exciting and energizing thing to do. For example, if your discovery revealed a large number of issues in your client's organization now, then it's not likely that your client has the capacity to achieve a broad vision for change now. That might be far too ambitious and too future-oriented. Instead, your client would be wise to take care of the most immediate issues for now and then do a very ambitious vision later on. Expending too much energy on an exciting vision now sometimes leaves planners too tired to attend to the extremely important tasks of developing and refining the action plans now. Instead, you might use their limited time and energies now on the sometimes challenging task of developing the detailed action plans, then do a compelling vision later on. However, if planners insist on doing a vision for change now, then consider doing a strategic vision rather than a grand vision. A strategic vision depicts the status of the organization and perhaps of its stakeholders shortly after it has implemented the upcoming change management plan. That is, after it has addressed its most urgent issues. For example, a strategic vision might be, quote, establish strong internal governance and leadership systems, unquote. In contrast, a grand vision depicts the organization and its stakeholders at a point much farther out into the future. For example, a grand vision might be, quote, poverty is solved in our lifetime, unquote. Now let's look at the criteria for very useful action plans. Perhaps the most important criterion for good action plans is that the plans are very focused on addressing the current problems in your client's organization. The way to ensure that action plans are focused on the most pressing problems is to associate each action plan with an overall goal that, in turn, is associated with at least one of the recommendations from the earlier discovery phase of consulting. Another criterion is that your client's action plans must have the strong and visible support of leaders in their organization. We discussed that requirement in the CDI course, Perspectives on Change in Organizations. That support from the leadership needs to be ongoing and visible. For example, leaders should publicly celebrate the various successes of the project as they are achieved. Next, action plans have to be culturally compatible to the culture of your client's organization. For example, some cultures prefer not to use a highly rational and linear approach to doing action plans. They might prefer instead to use a more organic and unfolding approach. If that is the case, then be sure to ask your clients how they will know what to do and when, and how they will communicate that information to others. Your client's organization should have sufficient resources to fully implement the action plans, or those resources should be made available very soon. For example, a small organization usually does not have the time or the funding to do comprehensive market research or to promptly implement a comprehensive product development process. Instead, it might be better to concentrate on fewer recommendations to implement for now, or to extend the deadlines to implement them. Action plans must be specific, which can make them much more understandable, accountable, and credible. If people are already very busy, they're not likely to implement plans that seem to be a list of generalizations, wishes, and hopes. Instead, the plans need to include specific goals to be accomplished by certain dates. The dates can be changed as the plans are being implemented. Last, the various action plans must be aligned and integrated with each other. That makes for much more focus and efficiency when implementing them. It also helps later on when ascertaining if those various plans are indeed even realistic. Now, we'll talk about the contents of well-designed action plans, the types of plans that are most likely to be implemented and to resolve the problems in your client's organization. Perhaps the most important content in a good action plan is listing the overall goal that that action plan helps to achieve. A broad goal might have numerous action plans, each of which mentions the same goal. For example, an overall goal might be to fully develop a board of directors. That overall goal might need 4 action plans. First, to hire a board expert. Second, to conduct board training. Third, to coach the board chair for 6 months. And fourth, to conduct a board evaluation in 6 months. Next, each action plan should have various objectives that, when achieved, will have achieved the overall action plan as well. In our example, the first action plan about hiring a board expert might have 3 objectives, including first, write a request for proposal. Second, get proposals. And third, select an expert. Good action plans also should specify the responsibilities of who is to accomplish each objective. For example, a new board governance committee might be assigned to oversee the objectives that we mentioned a few moments ago. Whoever is assigned the responsibility for an objective should also associate an estimated deadline for achieving that objective. For example, the board governance committee might associate deadlines for each of the objectives that we listed above. In the plans, it's also useful to mention any resources that might be needed to achieve certain objectives. For example, whether significant funds will be needed or whether certain help might be needed from an expert. Also, some organizations even add a status line in the action plans to report the status of the implementation of an objective. The texts for this CDI organizational consulting programs include examples of good action plans, including for our example of developing a board of directors. In summary, this all might sound like a lot of work, but it's not. It's working smarter rather than harder. Without good action plans, organizations often end up doing even more work as they flail around trying to resolve their issues, but repeating the same mistakes. The most important priority here is to accomplish useful action plans. The effort should not overwhelm your client's organization. Get started and make the process your own as long as it is relevant and realistic. Let's pause now to capture the learning from what you've heard so far in this video. In your learning journal for this program, go to the section entitled Reflections from the Readings and Videos and enter the 2 following questions. They're intended to customize the contents of the video to you and your clients. You might discuss the questions with your peers. The questions are, considering the typical types of clients that you work with or prefer to work with, what might be the biggest challenges in accomplishing effective action planning with them? Next, how might you overcome those challenges with your clients? You can pause the video by clicking on the pause button at the bottom left corner. After you've addressed the questions in your journal, then click on the button again to resume the video. The following general guidelines will be useful to you and your client as you begin developing your action plans now. First, the final format of the action plans is ultimately up to the leaders in your client's organization. Some leaders prefer highly specific and organized action plans, while others prefer less formal plans. If plans are less formal in format, then help your client to clarify how they will know who's to do what in the plans, and how your client will know when the plans have actually been implemented. Next, do your action planning in teams. Don't have each employee do the thinking on his or her own. The multiple perspectives and opinions in a team can generate more useful and realistic ideas and plans. Members of the team need to share their ideas with each other and also to share the questions needed among themselves to temper those ideas. During planning, don't forget the guidelines from the CDI course, Facilitating Group Decision-Making and Problem Solving. Involve those who will be most affected by the action plans. For example, the people who will be involved in implementing the plans or who will be affected by their implementation. Those people usually have the most knowledge of what actions are needed in order to achieve each goal, and they also have the most interest in ensuring that the plans will indeed even be realistic. And last, you don't need to strive for complete accuracy. You don't need perfection. You need plans that are complete enough and reasonable enough that people can soon start to implement them. Plans can be changed with good reason during the next phase of consulting, the implementation phase. Now, let's talk a bit more about how to develop the objectives in those action plans. In the meeting, among the planners, start by identifying the objectives for each goal one at a time. That approach makes the action planning much more understandable and manageable. Then, for each goal, one at a time, pose these questions to the team. What is success for the goal? That is, how will you know when you've achieved it or not? Next, have you ever successfully achieved goals like this in the past? And if so, what worked for you back then? Next, imagine some point in the future where that goal was achieved, for example, 6 months out. What do you imagine would have occurred during those next 6 months such that that goal was achieved? And next, can you now name 2 to 4 objectives for this goal? Repeat the steps 1 through 4 for each goal. And again, don't strive for perfection when identifying objectives. They can be modified later on, and often are, during the implementation phase of consulting. Now that all of the objectives have been suggested for now, it's time to integrate them all and to associate responsibilities and deadlines for each objective, and then to do a reality check. Here's some guidelines to do all of that. Start by integrating the objectives. The more tightly integrated all of the objectives are, the more effective and efficient their achievement will be. To integrate objectives, look at all of the objectives across all of the goals now. For example, list them on 1, 2, or 3 pages of paper, then answer the following questions. Do you see any duplication of objectives? Do you seem to see any overlap? Do they overlap quite a bit? Are any of them in direct conflict with each other, such that if one of them was achieved, it would counter the benefit of the other? And so for any of those situations, modify the objectives to avoid duplication, overlap, and conflict. Now that the objectives seem integrated, it's time to associate responsibilities and deadlines with each. When assigning responsibilities, assign the objectives to certain positions or roles in the organization, not to certain people. So for example, assign an objective to the marketing director rather than to Mary. Associate reasonable deadlines with each objective by having the people in each role suggest the deadlines for the objectives that were assigned to them. Encourage those people to be very realistic, including to think about their current responsibilities when developing new deadlines. Now it's time to do a reality check of the objectives. Pull out all of the objectives, put them in a grand timeline or onto a few sheets of paper along with the deadlines for each of the objectives, and address the following questions. Are too many of the objectives expected to be done too soon? If so, will you need more resources, such as people, money, or facilities? Or can you extend any of the deadlines for achieving certain objectives? Now that you've drafted your action plans, you and your client are ready to compile them into an overall change management plan. That makes it much easier to communicate the change effort to others, which is always critically important. Also, that makes it much easier to have one person be ultimately responsible for the plan. Let's quickly look at the typical contents of an overall plan for change. In your plan document, you might start with an authorization page that includes signatures of the leaders who support the plan. Next, you might include a description of the client's overall problem that was clarified during the discovery phase. You might even rephrase the term problem to be opportunity or goal. You might include the recommendations that were generated during the discovery phase as well. Next, you might list 5 to 7 goals that were associated with those recommendations. And next, you might include a vision for change if you did one during this action planning phase. You might include relevant appendices, such as the various action plans with their objectives, unless those plans would result in such a large appendix that the overall plan would be unwieldy to reference. You might include the process that will be used to monitor the implementation of the plan. And as a reminder, the CDI course, Perspectives on Change in Organizations, suggested several areas on which to focus your change management plan. You will recall from CDI's course, Roles, Goals, and Reasons in Consulting, that a primary goal of consultants should be to support the learning of their clients and of themselves. But that learning must be recognized and it should be made conscious. So be sure to take some time in the project now to collect that learning. Have a discussion with your client. For example, ask, are we remaining open to feedback and criticism about what we're doing? Should we work even harder to get that feedback? Are we questioning our perceptions, assumptions, and conclusions about what we're doing? And are we helping others to do the same? Is there evidence of creativity and innovation in what we're doing? Are we doing things differently as intended? What are we learning? What new knowledge, skills, and abilities are we getting from this project? So thank you for viewing this video from CDI. If you ever have any questions or want to share feedback about the CDI program, simply send us an email to info@consultantsdevelopmentinstitute.org.